This is primate diversity and conservation in Vietnam, and I said, but we can still chat about orangutans and pangolins. I saw the two books, actually got the books and read them before coming, and they're very fun books, kind of things. Hopefully you guys have a good discussion about that. I especially like the pangolin book because I know Thai, so it was kind of neat to see pictures of them and be like, oh, you're so young here. So. All right, so I absolutely loved this title, this idea, and everything else. Southeast Asian, a backpack, expert guides. We'll put experts in air quotes when I'm up here. You guys, I'm not going to speak to you at all about this. You'll be fine. Maps for teaching geography and conservation. So just the idea of it, the idea of getting everybody in the room, the idea of being able to kind of have some knowledge about this and be able to spread some of the knowledge about this region. And for this, it'll be more specifically about Vietnam, but happy to kind of chat about some of the other surrounding areas. First and foremost, especially with the weather today, I wanted to make certain that we don't turn it into this. All right, a few smiles and a few chuckles, good. That's better than the audiences that some other times. It's one of those, who are those people and what are you talking about? So we're going to keep it, light, keep it nice and easy kind of thing. So, sorry man, it's the Breakfast Club. Maybe before your time?
No.
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 But no, not you, was it? But, so I started traveling to Vietnam in 2005, and it was initially to conduct research on primates. And really the conservation of these creatures is my professional passion, but it's more than just the primates themselves. Even though I can't walk around town here and not hear something in the trees and be like, oh, that's right, it's going to be a squirrel. It's probably not going to be a primate. But it's still one of the, I love squirrels too, so it works out just fine. But it's, my wife and I lived in Vietnam 2008 to 2011. I was there on Fulbright, and she's actually a teacher in BVSD, so I was kind of surprised nobody was in the community from that, so Boulder Valley School District. So she's currently actually at the delegate assembly, so kind of fighting for your rights as teachers right now. So education is very important, but we moved over there in 2008. It was supposed to be 16 months in the field, and she ended up she was in the field with me working, and then she was like, this is really kind of boring, and I don't feel like doing this. So she moved back to Saigon and got a job at an international school, and she was teaching kindergarten. So it was one of those, oh man, we can stay much longer. So I called my advisor, Dr. Bert Covert, who's emeritus professor here, said, hey Bert, so I think we might stay. And his response was, do you have a guest bedroom? I said, yeah, no problem, stay as long as you want. So it worked out really well. We spent 3 years there, and I've tried to go back to Vietnam just about every summer. So it's a place that's still very near and dear to my heart. Good friends, good family there, kind of watching people grow up through all of it. So it's always a fantastic opportunity. Okay, so just a little bit of background. Order primates includes a great variety of creatures that are more closely related to one another than they are to any other creatures. So, anything from tarsiers, which are super funky little creatures that live mostly in Indonesia, owl monkeys, so are some New World monkeys, chimps, mouse lemurs, again, something that you wouldn't look at and be like, that's a primate. So incredibly, incredibly diverse group of organisms. Baboons you've probably heard about, and then Dr. Jane Goodall just celebrating her 90th birthday. And still, I think it's still like 330 plus days of travel a year, or it was for a long time. That woman gets all over the place, and always kind of fantastic to hear her talk or to see her talk kind of thing. The Roots and Shoots program, if you guys have not looked into it, they're all over the world. They've got branches of it, and it's basically teaching conservation to children. So definitely take a look at that if you haven't had a chance. All right, successful conservation activities require teamwork, and I'm very lucky to include Dr. Bert Covert as a mentor and as a teammate. This was taken a couple years ago about Gandian Zoo, so it's the Saigon Zoo and Botanical Park. So we were sending this to the students, because I'll talk about in a minute. We bring students to Vietnam every year, or have for the last 2 years. This will be our 3rd year with even another couple months. But one of the things that's fantastic about it is, as I said, Bert was a professor here. He's been working in Vietnam since 1998, and really kind of came into the program, started working with them, started going back to Vietnam, fell in love with it, and just kind of can't imagine not going back to travel. this is just amusing because we always tell our students, yeah, you need leech socks when you're in the forest during the wet season because the leeches are just ever present. So there's a company called Mosquito Hammock, and Bert was getting his leech socks from there. So we sent him a picture to show him out in the fields, and now he always is like, yes, I'm one of the models for them. What's even better is someone took this and photoshopped a tiger in the background for one of it, and it was one of the like moments before disaster struck kind of things. But again, just lots of fun to get out there. So really, it's one of those, I've been able to conduct research, I've been able to work with conservation actions, helped out actually drafting the conservation plan for primates that was signed into law by the Prime Minister of Vietnam. So CU Boulder actually has a very long history with a number of PhD students and master's students and honor students and undergraduate students that have done work in Vietnam and continue to work in conservation. So this was from 2 years ago. This is our first group of students. So this is in Cat Tien National Park where I lived and worked. And so took the students for 3 weeks to Vietnam to talk about conservation, introduce them to conservation organizations, introduce them to research organizations, and really kind of help them get a foot in the door of what conservation is and what it actually looks like in many different facets. What's fantastic is this young woman right here, Lisa Rhodes, came back from Vietnam, wrote a Fulbright grant, got the grant, and is currently in Vietnam on a year-long working on canopy bridges in Da Nang, so right along the coast. What's great about that is she called us up and she said, hey, I'm still going to be in Vietnam this summer. Are you guys bringing students again? We said, yes. Can I please help out? We said, yes, of course you can. So we'll have one more person on the ground, so a former CU alum that has been doing research to kind of help us with our class. So again, all these kind of fantastic feeding back circles for it. Okay. Some of the background for this, I tried to cut down the caffeine this morning, didn't work. It was only about half a pot, and then I kind of started up on again. So if you guys start getting this like psychotic squirrel, but impending extinction crisis of the world's primates, why primates matter. And this was published in January of 2017 by Estrada and his colleagues. And it really did get a lot of attention in the media around the world. So it really kind of went through and noted the major reasons for crisis and unsustainable human activities. And really, if I just kind of asked you guys, what do you think are conservation issues? What would be some of them? Not that early in the morning.
In Vietnam, specifically?
Let's go anywhere.
Okay.
In fact, let's go ahead and let's remove primates. What are issues that you think are going to be for wild animals anywhere in the world?
I think, I'm sorry. I think land use is huge, even in this country. I think water access is huge, especially for our, like, just like the native creatures that have to live like on our eastern plains, and how much of our water is like being diverted for human consumption.
Water is a huge, I mean, especially in Colorado, it's really easy to think about that.
It's unreal.
And I heard somebody start to say something over here.
I'm saying like deforestation, destroying the natural environment for factories or cities or whatnot.
Or even, as it's brought up in Barini, monocropping. So lots of different agricultural uses, lots of change in through there. Hunting, and one of the things in it, I think Danielle mentioned it before, it's one of those, you can look at a lot of these as local and global effects. One thing that I always try to convey to my students and convey to groups of people when I'm talking about is this is not a problem over there. This is a problem that we have right here. A couple of years ago, there was an article at a Rocky Mountain National Park talking about poaching one of the huge elk. And unfortunately, I don't remember the name of it, but it was one of those just big, massive, beautiful creature that was poached in our own backyard. So this is definitely something that happens here as much as it happens everywhere else. Deforestation. Exactly. If these are creatures that rely on forest habitats and we clear those habitats, we have a serious problem. These creatures are not really evolved to just kind of wander around town. The ones that can, like macaques, big problem as well. Little fantastic monkeys. We'll worry about that later. Expansion of agriculture. So there's all these reports that get put out that talk about the changes in forest cover all around the world. Quite often, they say, oh, we're doing a good job of reforesting. but how biologically diverse are those forests? You know, typically it's if you walk by a forest and you see nothing but straight rows of trees, that's not natural. So what kind of creatures can actually live within those reforested areas? But what Estrada and everything else did is they came up with a much more thorough list. So extensive new road construction, something that you hear quite often about in the Amazon. You know, you build new roads in there, it's so much easier to get there. Well, that means it's so much easier to extract, it's so much easier to hunt, it's so much easier to populate. So you start thinking about all these other first, second, and third level issues that are really coming into play. You've got large-scale industrial agriculture. I mean, hell, you drive east from Colorado through the rest of the U.S., and it's one of those, we are in the land of corn. Nothing but fields and fields of agriculture. Dam building. So we talk about water and water rights and everything else. What happens when you put a dam in? Oh, okay, good, we get electrical power to this area. It's a wonderful creation, it's fantastic. But you've gone ahead and you've altered a lot of the lifeways and life courses for animals that use those waterways. You also, if you put up a dam, you get a reservoir. So all of that forest area that used to be there, or that land that used to be there, is now inundated. Friends in Cambodia were actually, they just recently put in a dam along the Mekong, one section of the Mekong. And so you had wildlife biologists going in boats and rescuing animals, and putting animals into the boats to move them from waterlogged areas off into other sections. So kind of a really weird conservation effort, but it was one of those, you know, they're trapping anything and everything that they could before the trees got completely inundated and submerged by water. And then hosts of extractive activities. Oil and gas, diamonds, sulfur, anything that goes into lithium batteries. So anything below the ground, typically they do not just leave the forest intact there, cut it down, burn it, dig everything up, walk away when they made their money. So any of these kind of extractive activities can also be really problematic. And then international illegal wildlife trade. And realistically, any one of these topics we could talk about for far longer than we need to. But it's just be thinking about this whole suite of activities and how it really does kind of play out the same here as it does anywhere else. Okay, so all this was directly linked to consideration of high levels of poverty, rapid human population growth, and important challenges addressing the needs of local human populations in many of the areas where non-human primates are found. So again, a lot of my work and a lot of the work that we need to talk about is taking human populations into account. Kind of the old school ideas of ecology where you go out with like a hula hoop and throw it into an area and be like, okay, here is a pristine portion of the forest or a pristine portion of the area that we're going to look at. Well, we can't really think of it that way. Now it's one of those human populations and human activities really have, I'll say, done a number all over the globe. But we need to kind of focus on these things and what we can actually do with it. And apologize, there's a lot of words. Don't worry, I'll throw even more words at you too. But one of the things that the authors really note is that extinction rarely results from deficient scientific knowledge of the steps required to protect the species. A lot of times we're like, okay, we need to go out and study the species because we don't know what it does. You know, we don't know what it eats, we don't know how to take care of it, we don't know, all these things. For a good number of these species, we actually have this knowledge now. And people have been doing the field work, people have been doing the hard work to figure it out, but it's one of those, okay, what can we do with that information? So the problem becomes, instead, it's embedded in political uncertainty, socioeconomic instability, organized criminality, corruption, and policies that favor short-term profits over long-term sustainability. Again, I'm talking about Vietnam, but if you didn't say, hey, that happens right here. Well, there you go. Okay, so if we start talking about the primates of Vietnam, how do all these factors come into play? And one of the things that I love talking about, and we'll go through all the kind of primates in Vietnam, just to give you an idea of the wealth and diversity of species that actually exist there. So if we look at it, any number of gibbon species, we've got a species of slow loris, we've got more of the macaques, so some of the long-tailed macaques, we've got some of the Hattin langurs, and then the guys I studied were black-shanked dukes. So quite often people are like, oh, you study monkeys, what do you study? I said, well, I studied black-shanked duke. Can you get that? Can you describe that to me? Monkey, blue face, yellow, whiskers. Nope, still not ringing the bell. But again, a wide diversity of animals in there. So you guys have likely heard of, endangered animal or a critically endangered animal or a vulnerable animal. So these are actual, they're not just kind of terms that are bandied about. They all have definitions both in terms of the biologies of the creatures or in terms of some of the legalistic framework for it. So this is all established by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, so the IUCN. And like I said, it includes critically endangered, endangered, and vulnerable. And really those are all they represent species that are threatened with extinction. And some of them, like critically endangered, it's typically, if nothing is being done in the next 10 years, then we're looking at this animal that is likely to be extinct. And unfortunately, Vietnam has a large number of these creatures. So Vietnam's home to 25 primate taxa. It's kind of 26 or 27 depending on your given taxonomy. We'll talk about that later a little bit. Given taxonomy is kind of funky in that they're like, oh, it's this species or this species or this species or this species. And so there's been in the last 10 years an explosion of numbers of species. And it's not as if they're finding new ones. They're just going, oh, that's not what we thought it was. It's actually this instead. But important to kind of know. But so if we say 25 primate taxa, 23, so or 92% are threatened. Thus, primates of Vietnam are at much higher risk of extinction than primates at the global level. At the global level, we're talking about 60% threatened. Regionally, 73% of Asian primate species are threatened. So we're talking about a large group of animals. We're talking about a very diverse group of animals, but uniformly, they all have some level of threat associated with them. Okay, so now I just want to go through and show you some of the taxa, show you some of the species. In the book, again, they talk like Ginger Juice routinely talks about the boy being the slow loris kind of thing because of his eyeglasses. So these are actually what slow loris are. They're, about yay big. They can move very, very slow, except when they move fast. So we kind of really, really cool nocturnal creatures, which are, I'm going to always get it backwards, they're venomous. So here's a primate species, and what's really kind of neat about it is they've got, and this is where I'm going to go off on wild tangents, so if I start seeing really glazed over expressions, I'll try to rein it in. But their defensive posture is actually, they'll hunch over, and they've got glands on the back of their arms. So they actually lick the glands, and then the secretion mixing with the saliva becomes that venom. I think there's been one report of a human actually dying from it, and a good friend of mine who runs a rescue center got bit and was seriously sick afterwards. So, oh God, illegal animal trade stuff. These guys have really small, sharp, pointy teeth. So when people take them out of the wild and put them into trade, they actually pull all their teeth out so that they can't bite, which means they can't eat, which means the animals die in captivity. But cruel, stuff we work with every day. One thing I wanted to kind of just show is there'll be maps associated with each one of these. And again, just to kind of situate us, we've got Vietnam, you've got Cambodia, you got Laos, Thailand, up in the north you got China. But what this is showing is these are all the various protected areas throughout Vietnam. So a pretty decent amount of protected area coverage throughout the entire country. But the green borders are going to be where the animals actually occur. So you'll see that there are definitely some overlap with some of them. So, pygmy loris has got a pretty good north to south distribution. And the easiest reference point, this is pretty much the Mekong River. And the Mekong River forms a fantastic boundary. So many animals can't actually cross it. So we'll start to get distinctions in species. Northern slow loris, unremarkably, is in the north. For macaques, so macaques are kind of your catch-all. And taxonomically it makes sense, but it's one of those, whenever someone says, hey, monkey, realistically, you're kind of thinking this, unless you're thinking chumpy, which is kind of the weird cartoony chimp and monkey all jumbled together for mass distribution, but whatever. Rhesus macaques, incredibly well-known species, mostly from being captured and then being put into medical and biomedical stuff. Long-tail macaque, so the crab-eating macaque, Assamese macaque, stump-tail macaque, also known as the bear macaque, and then northern pigtail macaque. Very, very, they're lovely creatures, all of Northern pigtail, again, very good distribution all throughout the center of the country. The Assam macaque, mostly a northern species. Rhesus macaque, again, very, very widespread throughout the country, down almost to the far south. And then long-tail macaque, going much further. So long-tail macaque we work with in some of the islands and then some of the surrounding areas. There's all karst limestone down there, which is unfortunately being knocked out in order to harvest the limestone to make concrete, to build roads and to build new buildings and everything else. But the favorable thing is that we've had good conversations and good work with Holcim, which is one of the concrete manufacturers that you can actually find here in the States, that they've helped do some of the conservation work and some of the conservation easements. So again, all these are conservation conversations, trying to get everybody on the same page and try to show them what's going on and why it's important to do this type of work. Stubtail macaque, again, pretty good distribution north to south. And then once we get out of the macaques, we start getting into leaf monkeys. And here's where some of the diversity and some of the just absolutely fantastically beautiful creatures. So we've got the Katba langer, also known as the golden-headed langer. And I'll show you the map in a second there. The Delacour's langer, and I love the name for them in Vietnamese because it's Vok Ma Chan, which means monkey in white shorts. These white shorts and just big, beautiful, fluffy tails. Two species of silver langers, species of the Hatin langer, which we saw a picture of before. These guys are funny because they have like this fantastic mustache thing going on. Francoise's langer, they just have more cheeks. And then gray langers, kind of similar to another one called Fairy's langer. And I should have pointed out earlier, but so each one of these, so CR, critically endangered, endangered, and then the two species are both endangered. So these are both international criteria for the animals, but then Vietnam also has their local red book, is what it's called, that talks about all of the, whether they're endangered or critically endangered. So a lot of people going out and doing work to figure out what their habitat requirements are and how these species are actually doing. So likewise with maps again, so silver langer, again, in the south, but what's neat about it, again, remember that reference point of the Mekong being a solid boundary division. Yes, ma'am?
Why are they called leaf monkeys?
Because they eat leaves.
Oh, they don't eat other things.
They do eat other things,
Oh.
but predominantly they do eat leaves. So one of the big differences, macaques are called cheek pouch monkeys. So they'll shove everything like a hamster.
Yeah.
They'll shove their cheeks full and you'll see these gigantic, almost like freaky goiter kind of things going on. Whereas the leaf monkeys have a different gut system so that they can break down the cellulose, and then I'm not getting into the microbiome or the oral microbiome. Really super cool research, but leaf monkeys colloquially because they predominantly eat leaves.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Have you been able to see them?
So yes.
Do you get to, are they, so when you're just out hiking, are they?
For certain forest areas and forest blocks, yes. So these guys, so Katsian National Park is a rough reference point. It's usually, actually, no, I lie. It's this one because there's 3 different stations in the park. They're rare, but you can see them when you're going around. Macaques are quite often ground dwelling, so you'll see them around and everything else. We told our students, don't pet the macaques, don't be near the macaques. We ran into them a little bit later and they were covered in dirt and feces, and we're like, okay guys, what happened? They're like, the monkeys were all over us. And we're like, didn't we just talk about disease transmission yesterday and how it's a bad thing to be this close?
Wow.
And then we talked about primate viewing properly, but now we've got that changed in our syllabus, so way to have the conversation this year. It's all a learning
So they're friendly?
experience. Say what?
So they're friendly. Like a wild cat would run from you.
A wildcat will generally run from you, or turn and threaten you,
Right.
which I've had both happen.
But a
But
primate will not.
primates, so the problem is that it depends on where you are. If you're in a forest block, or if you're in an area where the animals are a little bit less habituated to people, then they'll kind of give you a wider berth. That's what I mean. But it's also one of those, when you turn around and there's 30 of them staring at you, it's one of those, I'll go this way. But the area that I'm talking about has a very large number of tourists that come through,
Yeah.
and tourists equal food. And the macaques are incredibly smart. So it's one of those, hey guys, no backpacks, keep stuff out of your pockets. Sunglasses, hats, because the monkeys will basically, they'll have a little cute one over here and everyone goes, oh, look at the cute little monkey. Then the adult jumps on top of you, steals your glasses, jumps back into the tree and waves the glasses at you going, you're gonna pay the toll.
That's cool.
Yeah, they're very, very intelligent creatures. Again, Indo-Chinese silverlanger, so Mekong is the border. These guys are only down in the far south. So a nice distinction of that. The gray langer, again, much further up. And I should say that these maps are only showing population distributions in Vietnam. These animals, as we joke, don't have passports. They don't care. They go back and forth, so there's a good possibility that there's sizable populations in Laos, and then possibly into China. China is its own thing that I'm not going to get too far into for this conversation. Françoisie, again, just in the far north, just along the border with China. The Cat Ba Langer, so only on Cat Ba Island. So if you guys have looked at pictures of Vietnam, I meant to ask, has anyone been to Vietnam or been to any parts of Southeast Asia? If you've seen pictures about Vietnam, or if you've thought about going there, you're always going to see like this beautiful water landscape with the kind of tall karst towers and the junks floating along. So that's Ha Long Bay, which is just outside of Hanoi. And the largest island there is Cat Ba Island. And so these guys only exist on Cat Ba, and we'll go into more detail on them in a couple minutes, but very, very restricted habitat in the most popular tourist destination in Vietnam. You can mull over the consequences of what's going on there. Delacourse Langer, only a very, very restricted area, which holds 2 national parks. So Cuc Phuong National Park, which is the first national park. So if you've ever read Ho Chi Minh's speech about forests are gold, that's where it was delivered. That's kind of when he was setting up that national park. And then another area called Van Lom, which is beautiful. It's kind of a watery area with karst right in the center, and you go and you get in these little boats, and they kind of paddle you out, and you can watch the monkeys jumping around right along that area. So very, very lovely. Ha Tinh, only in the center of Vietnam, and Lao. And then we start getting into our really freaky ones. Somebody had put down snub-nosed monkeys as something that they were very interested in. So Vietnam is home to the Tonkin snub-nosed monkey. It's critically endangered and it's endemic. It only lives in northern Vietnam. So again, a species that there's been a ton of work and research out of CU Boulder that we're incredibly proud of, because the animal was thought to be extinct. A graduate student, so he was a Vietnamese gentleman who did his master's in Vietnam and came and did his PhD at CU Boulder, helped refine the populations and helped establish a very nice protected area. And this goes in concert with the Denver Zoo. So Denver Zoo used to be heavily involved in a lot of the conservation work there. So all these kind of really cool, local to Colorado, but doing work someplace far away. And then we've got our 3 flavors of dukes. So we've got our red shanks, red legs, gray shank, gray legs, and black shank, black legs. So the red shanks, mostly through central Vietnam, was actually, so when we go out, when we take the students, we take them out to Da Nang, right along the central coast. And so there's a peninsula, the Son Gia Peninsula, which used to be the old US military base. So it's beautiful forest, and the animals are just running around in the canopy right in that area. So it's really, really rough to spend a week there. You go, you look at the monkeys, you look and you see the ocean, go hang out at the beach. Somebody has to do the work, right? Gray shanks, again, another endemic species, so only lives in Vietnam. And there's been a bunch of work, especially with WWF and then Green Viet, a local Vietnamese NGO, non-governmental organization, working on corridors through some of this area. So trying to preserve some of the forest and trying to actually reforest some of these areas with proper vegetation. So lots of cool work going on there. And then black shank dukes, far down into the south, and then huge populations, or at least there used to be huge populations in Cambodia. So this is really where more of the strongholds of the species are. And then, like I said, Tonka's snub-nosed monkey. And again, after we've seen all these distribution maps, we start seeing things that are just a little tiny, tiny dot. That's the only area where these animals still occur. Okay, gibbons and gibbon taxonomy, this is, like I said, where it gets a little bit funky. Have you guys ever heard gibbons?
Mhm.
Like either at zoos or anything else like that? So when you hear them, they sound like birds. And more often than not, if you're watching a movie, and it doesn't matter whether it's a good movie or a bad movie, they'll always insert ubiquitous forest sounds. So like, you know, people are like, we're trekking through the jungles in South America. And then you hear this bird song, you know, or you think it's bird song, and it's actually gibbons. And they've just taken it because they're like, cool, forest track. Wait, now you know you're in a forest. But, they wake up every morning and they scream at the sun. That's how we joke about it. So they kind of, what's neat is the males and the females, and so the males are typically black, and then the females are usually this buff color. So there's sexual dichromatism going on, but they'll duet. So like the female will start singing, then the male will join in, and you'll hear them sing back and forth. And it's a territorial display, which is basically like, hey, I'm a gibbon. Hey, I'm a gibbon too. I like trees. Oh, I like trees too. This is my tree. Can I see your tree? No. Can I see it now? Sure. They're wonderful creatures. They're goofy as well. But western black cheeks, southern yellow cheeks, northern white cheeks. So that's where some of that taxonomic distribution started to go. They started listening to the songs and really doing detailed analysis. And they're like, oh, those songs are different enough that they're two different species. And then they went through and did the genetics and they found out, oh yeah, that's 3 different species. All right, we need to start changing some of the maps around. But absolutely wonderful, wonderful little creatures. So western black gibbon, again, very, very small distribution, up in a very, very mountainous part of Vietnam. So eastern black gibbon, one tiny, tiny little spot right on the border with China. And so, as you guys may know, Vietnam and China don't really have the best history. And luckily this is changing. Younger generations and younger populations have an easier time. And there's actually been good conservation work across the border to help protect some of these animals. But, you know, I don't want to make light of it, but it's one of those, like, if it doesn't rain, sometimes some of our friends are like, the Chinese have screwed with the weather. And we're like, okay, calm down. That's not what's going on, I think, but, you know, it's, now that young people are talking together, it's a much better situation. We have northern white cheeks, so again, a northern distribution of these creatures. We've got our southern white cheeks, and again, unless you really went through and looked at the genetics or really listened to the song, if you just looked at pictures of them, you're like, dude, you're just showing me the same pictures over and over again. But there is variation within the species. Northern yellow cheeked, so they got a little bit more of a buffy color in their cheeks. And then our southern yellow cheek gibbons. So these are the ones that we see mostly in the park where I live and work. And this is a female, so she's got that cool stripe on the top of her head. Okay, so we've looked at basically all the primate species that we have there. As I said, very, very wide diversity of creatures. So why are the primates of Vietnam at such a high risk of extinction? We've talked about it. You guys could probably, you know, list them all out or at least have a pretty good idea of what's going on with it. But again, they're the same kind of threats that are in that kind of impending extinction article. Illegal wildlife trade, habitat degradation, habitat fragmentation, habitat destruction, and that is road building, industrial agriculture, dam construction, and mining. So all these intensive human activities that are going on within these areas. This is the area to the far south that I mentioned with the concrete and the limestone companies. So right along the coast, you have all these limestone blocks. So quarrying of the limestone in Kinh Nhien province is causing a lot of degradation to the habitat. And so you've got your endangered Germain's langur who live within these forest blocks, but the forest blocks are all being cut down and then all the limestone is being cut right away. We've had some success with it, and actually a former graduate here, Dr. Andy Ang, so she's from Singapore, came here to do her PhD, was working on not only trying to get some of the mangroves that grow along the coast that the animals use for transport, trying to help replant those, but also looking at canopy bridges to establish essentially like exit routes through some of these areas. Because, I mean, ideally, if you're a concrete company, you want to, you know, put a pier right here, you want to sail your boat up, you want to cut this thing down, put everything on the boat and take off. So we're saying, wait, there's animals on this one, can you leave this one alone? And if you need to, can you harvest this one? Or if there's animals here, can you help us to get the animals off? That's when you start getting into translocation, and that's its own incredibly difficult thing, you know, both in terms of permits, in terms of animal survival, in terms of medical knowledge. Like, it's amazing work, but it gets very, very complicated. So we got habitat degradation here. We've got road construction. And again, you wouldn't think that road construction is all that big of an issue in some of it. You're like, well, you're just putting a small road through here, we'll say. But this was in Buyamap National Park. So it's one that's right up along the coast. Sorry, the coast. Other side. This is right along the border with Cambodia. So the military said, okay, we want to put a road through here so that we can help patrol, because we're seriously concerned about the Khmer coming back over the border again. They tried it once, it did not go well for them. So they've put in this road. The road gives better access now, so these areas that were completely forested. The biggest concern, so if we talk about gibbons, gibbons are completely arboreal. They spend their entire lives up in the trees. They don't want to come to the ground at all. So if you have an area where you suddenly, you know, before you could move across freely through this canopy, now they've gone ahead, and this is about, I think we figured it was about a 40-meter gap, so 120 feet, if not more, through some of these areas. Gibbons can jump a very long distance, but they can't clear that. So you've essentially just cut a fragment in half. So now they can't move around as easily. You also have people that can kind of go through there. Soldiers, I'm not picking on them, but they're quite often bored young men in the middle of nowhere with nothing to do. So they start shooting animals. Or in some instances, there's not enough food for some of the people in the areas, so they start hunting. Or they can earn 6 times the amount of money they do in 1 year by taking some of these poached animals and put them in the illegal animal trade. So there's financial incentives for some of that. Now, a lot of that's changing, but it still presents some issues. So we've got, you know, this fragmentation there. This one is also a very unfortunate one. So this is in Biduk Nuiba, which won't mean anything other than it used to be a French hill station, so basically Vietnam's hot. So in the summertime, they build places higher up in the mountains where it's nice and cool. And then you go from Dalat all the way down to the coast, so to Nha Trang, the Trang, which is a beautiful beach area. So there used to be, I mean, there's road systems to get around, but it would take, you know, 5 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours. They said, hey, you know what? Why don't we go ahead and build this road from one tourist destination to the other one, right through the middle of this forest? We said, but guys, you're not supposed to be building roads through your forest. That's your rules. And they said, okay, no problem. We'll build it anyways. Now, okay, we've got, and a friend of mine pointed this out, driving around on I-70 in Colorado, there's a greater than 0 chance that a rock can hit you, or that, you know, we can have mudslides and landslides and everything else. You know, here on our road systems, this is a road that was kind of hastily constructed, and you can see they just slashed away all the forest and built a road right through there. So this road continually is getting shut down from landslides, mudslides, rock slides, anything and everything. So it's, you know, a huge problem, and it's right in the middle of this beautiful forest. So again, these corridors where animals were traveling through, now you've cut up this wide swath, you've just cut the thing in half. I don't know, it's a fun but terrifying road to bicycle on, because you can ride up from the top of the mountains and scream right down to the coast while trying to avoid buses and motorbikes and cars and everything else. But again, same things that we're doing here, but you know, how well is it done there? Okay, illegal timber extraction, and so Nui Chua National Park is out along the coast, and these are, I mean, they're huge redwood trees that are incredibly valuable. So people will come through, they'll cut the things down, they'll strap them onto their backs, and then they'll carry the wood out the forest, which is incredibly dangerous. People quite often die when we're doing this type of illegal extractive extractive work. But it's getting better in some of these areas. There's better protection, there's better rangers coming through to actually work on it, there's better knowledge of why we shouldn't be doing these things. But again, this is a lot of money, and people can be earning a ton of money by going through and doing these extractive activities. The other problem is that quite often the trees that are isolated and taken are the ones that many of the animals in the forest depend on. So the animals are losing habitat, and the animals are just kind of, then that changes the entire forest structure because you open up the canopy, you get all this crazy undergrowth, you just change the forest structure. Again, another wildly different topic. Illegal hunting is still a serious problem in Vietnam. So I apologize for these pictures, but these were actually posted to social media, which is how the people got captured. So they went through, and there was a black-shank duke that was poached in 2011, probably from Williamap. So the first road picture along the Cambodian border. And all these things are taken in terms for traditional medicine. Traditional medicines can vary wildly in terms of what they're used for. More often than not, traditional medicine that is plant-based actually has some efficacy. Traditional medicine that is animal-based doesn't do shit. Pardon my language, but that's what happens a lot of times. People, the great example is with loris. So loris fir actually looks like a type of moss that grows on some trees, and that moss itself can actually be used for, I think it's blood clots or stopping, so it actually helps with coagulation, so it'll help not blood thinning, but it'll help to kind of coagulate the blood. And so the moss does that, but because the loris fir looks like it, they think it does the same thing. Okay, we've stared at this one long enough, but traditional medicine, huge issue through the entire region. And moreover, not only are the animals actually captured in Vietnam, and the pangolins are a great example of this, but Vietnam is a superhighway. Stuff coming through the continent of Africa, stuff coming through other parts of Southeast Asia, and it all gets filtered through Vietnam up into China, or it stays local. So, all right. Briefly review challenges for the critically endangered primates found only in Vietnam. So the stem-nosed monkey, this is the Tonkin stem-nosed monkey, again, only a small region in northernmost Vietnam. And this is, so it's Dr. Lê Khap Quit. Quit got his PhD here at CU Boulder. He's really been working with this species for decades now, but they're incredibly, incredibly striking creatures. Like, I've yet to go up to the forest to actually see them, but they're goofy and amazing looking all around. So issues with these guys, there still is some hunting, although the hunting pressure really has been reduced. There's been a lot of work within the local communities and local communes to kind of take back the guns and to stop people from hunting. Because quite often, and this happened in Madagascar as well, where it's one of those, hey, we're here to help protect the monkeys. Well, why don't you go protect your own monkeys? Well, because they only live right here, and they're incredibly important to the community. And so educating the kids mostly. The groups that have worked with them, they bring in school children up to the forest blocks and kind of talk about what the animals eat, talk about where they live. And so there's this great sense of, hey, these are our monkeys that only live here. And getting the kids to kind of work through those angles of conservation to be like, no, we're not going to hunt these things. So kids telling their parents what to do. In some instances, it works. Development activities, including a large hydroelectric dam project. So one of the regions where these guys were best known from was an area called Nha Hang. Well, they put in a dam, the entire forest flooded, and the animals were extirpated. So the animals were extinct within that particular block. There's still some conversation whether the animals are there or not, but in all likelihood, just with the population pressures, the human pressures, hunting pressures, and all the forest being flooded, that's no longer the main species hold. It's more further north up in this forest block called Ho Khai. But deforestation, as I just kind of mentioned there. But this is some good news, and this was a little bit older, but from 2020, Dr. Quit in the Ho Khai population, it went from 100 to 150 individuals during the preceding years. So these are small numbers, but these are incredibly important numbers. Like for these things, the numbers are going in the right direction. Last time I talked to them, I think the population was somewhere in the low 200s. So they're still seeing animals, they're still having babies, they still have forest blocks, they're expanding the forest in some of these areas, there's better protection, so lots of good conservation work being done in the areas. Okay, Katba langur, so occurs only on Katba Island, as I described. In the 1960s, there was nearly 3,000 of the creatures, and today the population is probably less than 70. So that's it. There's 2 or 3 that are in a rescue center right outside of Hanoi, and that is its own kind of tragic story. Like they had a male and a female, they had an infant, male gets killed by a snake, infant turns out to be male, breeds with the mom, so, but it's one of those, okay, good, they're breeding, genetically is this really the best thing? Well, there's more than 0 now, so that forms its own kind of conservation conversations to have about it. But the Katba langur project is working on Katba and is doing some pretty amazing work there now. But we had systematic hunting, primarily for that traditional medicine, destruction of most of the mangroves through the area, and in the past 2 decades, large-scale development of Katba Island for tourism. So you've got lots of tourism issues and then lots of tourism continuing activities that's damaging the habitat and threatening their existence. So you had Katba, a small island, you have more human population moving there to increase the tourism that's going through there. They basically took the national park, cut the national park in half with a road that you can drive on back and forth between the 2 ferries to get on and off the island. There isn't enough fresh water on the island to support the amount of people and the amount of tourism that are going through the island. The tourism keeps expanding, so as I said, the Katba langur Conservation Project has been doing some amazing work. And here's the one thing that I think social media can be a benefit for. It's easy to reach out to friends in Vietnam and just kind of get a sense of what's going on. So Katba langur posted this morning that they've actually just found a new baby. So the population is expanding, so I think now it's in the upper 70s, lower 80s kind of thing. But still, when you're talking about a global population of things, that's a handful of creatures. And it's also, they're in small populations, and some populations are just males. So that's not so useful. And there's some that are males and females that are reproducing, but it's on a smaller forest block. So do you move the animals together? Do you try to separate? Do you try to build bridges? These are all the kind of nuanced conversations about how to preserve some of these species. But again, likely the species would be extinct if not for the efforts of the Katba langur Conservation Project. Okay, our monkeys in white shorts, so restricted just to a small area in northern Vietnam, just outside of Hanoi, so the capital. And there's been extensive surveys over the past 2 decades suggesting that the animals now exist in less than 10 locations, with a global population that was 350 declining down to 200. And again, we can talk about metapopulations in that, here's a small group of 2 males and a female, and here's a group of 3 males, and here's a group of 5 females. They can't connect. How can we get them together? Do we build forest corridors? Like, how can we make these populations sustainable? So Van Lum, the nature reserve I mentioned, where you kind of paddle around in boats, about 100 individuals, but all the rest of them have these very small numbers within the populations. Hunting, deforestation, and the mining of the karst. So again, getting rid of that limestone to make the concrete, leading causes for the population declines. But some good news, the population of Van Lum is being better protected and is actually expanding. So try to give good news as well, aside from just the gloom and doom of it all today. So our eastern black-crested gibbon, so it's that single forest area right along the Vietnam-China border. So a species that needs a lot of room, that doesn't have a lot of room, can't go anywhere kind of thing. But you've got a concerted conservation effort. So during the past 15 years, it's stabilized the population. So approximately 130 individuals in fewer than 25 social groups. But again, the numbers are going in the better direction for a lot of it. So appears to increase, but there's a lack of suitable habitat. So how can we go ahead and how can we expand some of that? Is it going to be reforestation? Is it going to be changing some of the activities in the local people so that there is the ability for the animals to have more space to grow? But, I mean, significant deforestation primarily because of agricultural expansion. So, again, all these particular issues. Still some hunting as well. One of the questions that I got from the group, how have consumerism and globalization impacted the environment, thinking companies like Nike that produce goods in this area of the world. And I can't give a direct answer to it, but we can talk about some of it definitely. If we just look at it in the idea that, you know, Vietnam has a human population of about 103 million. And the economy has really developed rapidly during the past 20 years. The country is now a major exporter of agricultural goods, clothing, crude oil, and electronics. And it's always one of those, you know, when you get a chance, check most of the tags of your clothing, and there's a good possibility that it says, you know, made in Vietnam. One of my favorite is when it says, Hecho in Vietnam. So a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of Vietnamese all mixed together on the list. So you've got a very large population of people, and you still have 25 million people that depend on forests for subsistence and livelihoods, including wages, which will affect a variety of species for, you know, non-timber use, as well as species that are logged, or stuff that's used for fuel wood. So in the far north, a lot of the Tonkin those monkeys habitat were being cut away because the farmers and a lot of the local people were going in to clear all the trees in order to have fuel to cook food. One of the projects that Denver Zoo was working with, and the name of the partners escaping me, but basically they created more fuel efficient stoves so that you could use less fuel in order to produce the same amount of food. So it's a project that they've done, I think, mostly in Eastern Africa, but then they imported the project up to northern Vietnam, and they've seen some really good results. So people being able to go to the forest less for fuel, people being able to cook more with less fuel. Then of course you get some, you know, entrepreneurs that are like, well, if it takes less fuel, then I can produce more. And so they started making more rice wine and selling that, which was kind of a little bit of an add-on effect they weren't really thinking about, but generally more positive than negative. But yeah, you've got a bunch of different companies coming in and either clearing areas for factories, people becoming directly involved in working in those factories, so changing kind of traditional life ways of either living in villages and working on smaller agricultural plots to then go into the city, so you're no longer farming for subsistence, now you're into a wage economy, you're making money, which means you then have to go back and buy food, and all how that changes around, and we've seen that all over the world and how that really can screw with what people do, but it is definitely something to consider. And it's also funny in that, I mean, Vietnam was a place that a lot of companies started looking at because the labor was so cheap, and then during the pandemic there was a lot of pushback because the people in Vietnam were like, no, we're not going to go to your factories and work in the factories where we're at risk of getting COVID if you're not going to help protect us. So we're not going to go back and work in there right now. But we need these things. Are you going to help us? No. All right, well, tell me how that goes for you. So you just see some different power dynamics in some of those situations as well.
Aren't there like local gangs I'm specifically talking Nike, that if you are a worker that stands up for your rights, then there's like political pressure because economically they're very reliant on American companies in some of these areas, is my understanding. And so there's this whole documentary that I've seen with Nike, and if you try to go and investigate it or try to ask for better wages or stop polluting, etc., then the locals have essentially gangs that come after you and will like attack people.
I don't know well enough to speak with confidence about that. What I would say is, yeah, probably completely. There are plenty of other gangs that are associated with animal trade, that are associated with drugs, with prostitution, with anything under the rainbow. Mm-hmm. That being said, there is a lot of kind of variation in authority for some of that. So there definitely can be, you know, if you're screwing with my money, we're going to have problems. And that happens all over the place. It happens quite often with environmental concerns. So a company that is producing, there's a lot of pig farmers and a lot of problems with that. And so they'll allow the waste to run into the waterways, which then kill off the fish farms, which then kill off other people's farms. And when they say, hey, you're not allowed to do that because there's laws against it, and the local farmers try to stand up against it, they run into a lot of problems. Harassment by the police, harassment by some of the local government. So that's why I want to say, I wouldn't doubt it, but I can't speak confidently about all the details of it. But I'd like to actually see that documentary.
I have it. I use it teaching.
Okay, I'll get the name of it after. Thank you.
Yeah.
'Cause I would definitely
It's like fairly
not
old.
like to, but
It's like fairly old, is my understanding.
I
But
imagine the ways have just gotten
if
better.
at all it's changed.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So the 4 species that we talked about specifically are all up in the far north. That does not mean that we don't have other issues going on in the south, but that's where we've got our critically endangered endemic species. So, as I mentioned before, so 6.8% of Vietnam's land territory is located in formal protected area systems distributed across the country. So the system is sufficient for the conservation of most, if not all, the primates, if they're really protected. How porous are those borders? How much are people actually coming into the forest? How much are people extracting from the forest? How much are rangers protecting the forest or looking the other way? And there's been all sorts of issues with all these things. And again, really no different than a lot of what we see through the rest of the world. So in 2014, so the IPS is the International Primatological Society, and every 2 years there's the Congress. There's a meeting that travels around the world, generally to areas where primates are. So in 2014, the meetings were actually held in Hanoi, and the meetings were called Meeting the Challenges of Conserving Primate Diversity. And it was put on by the Vietnam Administration of Forestry, so VN Forest, and the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. So the officials that I work with and have worked with in terms of helping do conservation work, and they're the ones that really set the tone for it. So what was amazing about this is it was August in 2014, and there were more than 900 participants from nearly 60 countries. And the theme of the Congress, as I said, meeting the challenges of conserving primate diversity. So you got a whole bunch of both international scientists, national scientists, and then a large number of students. So Vietnamese students, Indonesian students, Khmer students, Cambodian students, all coming to this conference, all kind of working together to either give talks or to listen to talks about what's going on for primate conservation. So this really was a good example of a commitment, and it's the realization by VN Forest of the need for a national level action plan to direct and coordinate primate conservation activities. So there was a team of Vietnamese and international scientists. So as I mentioned, Dr. Lê Khắc Quýt, a Vietnamese gentleman, Dr. Andy Ang, a Singaporean woman, Bert Covert, Amy Harrison Levine, who used to be the director of conservation activities at Denver Zoo. She's since moved on and started her own NGO and is doing conservation activities in a different sphere. And then myself. And we met a number of times since 2014 and completed a draft titled Conservation Action Plan for Primates in Vietnam. So this is the one that was approved by VN Forest and MARD in early 2017 and submitted to the Prime Minister for his approval, which was granted on May 10th. So being able to help out in writing some of the conservation action plans for the country. Moreover, and this is Mr. Wen Man Hiep, and he was formerly of VN Forest, I think he now works for IUCN, but he was the one that really kept the planning of the action moving forward. So a young government official dedicated to conservation activities. So the action plan includes a series of principles and goals and the appropriate support from the government's local and international conservation groups. We really hope that it'll lead to successful and sustainable conservation action for all the non-human primates in Vietnam. There have been several other attempts to draft an action plan. So we weren't the people to walk in and go, you know, what you guys really need is this. It had been attempted many times before, but all of them had failed in large part because they were not successful in engaging a variety of Vietnamese stakeholders. I realize I'm a white man, and I realize I travel to other countries. But one of the things that I never try to do is walk in and be like, all right guys, y'all need to be listening to me because I'm the white guy in the room. By actually getting Vietnamese stakeholders from a number of different places, from the government, working with NGOs, working within research institutes, everybody had an equal voice at the table. And more often than not, the best thing we could do was sit there and shut up. Provide a table, provide a place to work, and then keep the conversation moving along. So in this case, the leadership shown by young Vietnamese scientists working in partnership with the Vietnam government, international scientists and NGOs, along with a concerted effort to look beyond varying opinions to develop consensus and realistic objectives and goals, actually yielded success. So conservation planning, like conservation work, requires effective teamwork. So in June of 2019, there's Bert smirking because he gets to hang out with all of his friends. And I took part in a multi-stakeholder Tonkin snub-nosed monkey conservation workshop in Hanoi. I'm always easy to tell, I'm the snappy dresser. I'm an anthropologist, this is dressed up for me. But what was great about it is it was, again, people from so many different areas all working together. The Denver project with the stoves, so it's Rebecca, I apologize, I can't remember, I think it's New Frontiers Foundation or something like that. I'll have to look it up and get back to you on that. Here's Dr. Le Caquet, a gentleman that works with Tonkin snub-nosed monkeys. Another gentleman, Vu Lum. I'm pointing out to the young Vietnamese scientists. So Vu Lum and his wife started 2 different NGOs in southern Vietnam that focus, she runs a social enterprise, so working with local ethnic minorities to kind of take some of their crafts and bring them to markets for sale. So this is actually, this basket with the Tonkin snub-nosed monkey painted on it is some of their work. And then Lum does a number of work with both terrestrial and aquatic species, so looking at whales, looking at dolphins and everything along the coast of Vietnam. So just, they're friends, but highlighting some of the incredible work that they do. So we had all that, and then COVID-19 came along. Pretty much shut everything down. You couldn't travel, you couldn't go out to the forest, you couldn't do any work whatsoever. So while there was all this momentum from 2014 with the international conference, there was the workshops that had been hosted, there was all the work on getting the conservation plan in action, there were plans to get people out into the forest and doing the work, everything shuts down. And so in November of 2022, Bert and I helped organize Revitalizing the Primate Action Plan. So again, bringing together stakeholders from all over the region in order to sit down and say, okay guys, what has happened since the action plan went into effect? Are we making progress? Are we losing ground on some of these things? And again, getting everybody into the same room and trying to see where things are. It's a lot of personality. It's a lot of conflict. It's a lot of resources that are needed and not only a lot of resources that are available. So same thing all over the world. But what we say, many challenges remain, but with effective teamwork by local, national, and international partners, I anticipate that we can meet the challenges of primate conservation in Vietnam, including building the necessary capacity and awareness needed for success. So even though a lot of it is kind of doom and gloom, it's definitely one of those, if you get mired in that rather than thinking we can make a difference, then we're not going to make a difference. Okay, like I said, there'll be a little bit about penguins. I thought it was fantastic, the 2 books that were selected for this. And has anybody seen a penguin at the zoo or anywhere else? So I've seen them in zoos. I've never seen them in the wild. I would absolutely love to. I've seen other things, but so Save Vietnam's Wildlife has a rescue center in Cuc Phuong, so in that first national park in Vietnam, and they have like wonderful enclosures and everything else, and a lot of them are very focused on what the animal needs rather than people coming in to look at them. So a very, very successful way of working for like ex situ, so zoo type of relationships. But again, a local organization established in Vietnam to carry out nonprofit conservation activities. I think it originally started off as OCP, so Austin Civets. So civets are like kind of weasel looking things. Then it became the Small Carnivore Project, and now it's kind of morphed into Save Vietnam's Wildlife. So a lot of amazing work that they're doing. I've seen pictures of Ty actually smiling. I think he's smiling in the book for at least one picture. But he's got a lot of work going on, a very serious dude. But recently there was a big IUCN pangolin specialist group, and so people from all over the region getting together to work with Taipei Zoo on some of the pangolin conservation. Another thing that's absolutely fantastic is quite often, because they'll be going out to schools and working with small children, inevitably somebody has some kind of costume. So like there's Tonkin Stumbo's monkey costumes, there's pangolin costumes. There's an Australian NGO that I've worked with called Free the Bears. And so they do illegal animal trade with bears. So the dancing bears in India, they took all of those guys out of captivity. There's been work in Laos, and they have rescue centers there. There's work in Cambodia, rescue centers there. A couple in Vietnam that we've helped with. But one of the things that they do to raise awareness is every year in Angkor Wat in Siem Reap, there's a 5K, 10K, and half marathon. And so Free the Bears would have people dress up in animal costumes. So I ran as a gibbon for a couple years, and you do a 10K around the Angkor Wat complex, which is pretty amazing and super goofy. One other thing that I kind of just wanted to highlight for a moment is, and it's a little off topic, but I think it's important to show that conservation can take many different aspects. A good friend and amazing artist, Dao Van Huang, was recognized a couple of years by the ASP, so the American Society of Primatology, specifically for his work and for his art. So he goes around, he travels around, and he creates art that he puts up for display and also for sale to kind of just show the diversity of creatures that are out there. So one of his paintings is of pangolin. Another series he has a whole bunch of orangutan photos, and this one again struck me from our book that we read, where it's kind of talking about the leaves over the head and whatnot. And so that's something that orangs do in the wild all the time, and just kind of this idea of the bond between the two of them. And then kind of looking at the slow loris again, and talking about deforestation. So thank you guys very much. I hope it wasn't Breakfast Club. I hope it was all right. And if you have any questions, please fire away.
I have a lot of questions, but one of my things that I wrote down, that I think that, and maybe it's just me, but being from just the United States and not having like international exposure like this, my definition of conservation has to change, and when I'm teaching it has to change, because I think about like water and the things that affect us like right here, but when I'm thinking about connecting science topics, like the definition is bigger. It's like conservation of animals. It's not just the forest, like it's bigger than that. That term has to be broader is what I'm trying to say, and that really impacted me hugely. So
no, it's a fantastic point, because it really is. It's easy to lock conservation into a particular box,
right,
and say, well, when I'm talking about this, what I'm really talking about is protecting forests, or protecting waterways,
right,
or protecting panda bears. Everybody loves panda bears, But it's one of those. Okay, how are they all connected?
mm-hmm.
And it really is. You can look at one particular thing, but what is the entire sphere that is going into that? What's affecting it? And it can be the simplest of things. I mean, kids are great for being scientists. They're like, I'm not a scientist. They're like, how did you choose what you wear today? Did you look out the window? It's raining, it's windy. Should I dress accordingly? No, in elementary school, they quite often don't do that, but whatever.
They do.
But they can start to ask questions. Like, they're even the simplest and I'll say the silliest things or whatever. Like, okay, so you talk about eastern Colorado. Driving through eastern Colorado when we were younger, years ago, whatever, your car would be covered in bugs. Now you drive that route and you're not covered in bugs.
It's true.
What's that mean?
Yay, we don't have to wash the cars. Well, what does that actually mean?
Mm-hmm.
We've lost, loss of biodiversity. Is it because of pesticides? Is it because of changing farm practices? Is it because of there's all of a sudden all these additional things to be thinking of. Well, if the bugs aren't there, what happens to the birds that are trying to eat the bugs as they're migrating through?
Mm-hmm.
What happens to crops? So it's just, you're right. And those are all issues of conservation. It just depends on how you reframe the question or how you broaden your horizons with it. Because realistically, if we talk about everything being interconnected in some manner, then there's some way to connect the dots across through there and really kind of getting out of that small perspective and looking at it in a much broader thing. Somebody can go, well, I want to look at fish. Cool, so let's talk about fish. And you mentioned, again, water. We helped run, it was a Mekong, conservation along the Mekong. And so we had people talking specifically about monkeys, because that's what we do. But then we also had people talking about fish populations, like in Cambodia, Lake Tonle Sap. It's one of the largest freshwater fisheries and feeds millions of people a year. But as dams are constructed along the Mekong from the source down to there, you're starting to get a restriction of the amount of water through there. So it's cutting off the aquifers and cutting off the fisheries, which means there's a whole bunch of people that are going to starve. And again, we're looking at the Mekong River, we're looking at conservation, but how do you start to build all those pieces together and really focus on it? And, I mean, dam construction and how you build the dams. And listening to the Army Corps of Engineers, like, I became an anthropologist because I don't like math. But suddenly listening to all these people, and I'm like, wow, it's amazing. I need to know more about this. So it's just fun to open your eyes to all these different things. So thank you. Great point.
So can I ask, was there anything?
Yeah, no, go for it.
Okay, because I'm a firm believer in the power of zoos, so I don't want this to.
The power of what, I'm sorry?
Zoos.
Okay.
But how did Denver get gibbons? Because they kind of just hang out there in the kind of the Asian area of that.
Yep.
Where do they get them?
Oh, I'm not going to speak to where they got theirs, but I trust the Denver Zoo to be reputable in how they're actually handling things. Animals get traded back and forth between zoos fairly regularly, and there's been a lot of work and a lot of important regulations in not taking animals from the wild to put into zoo populations. There also has been a lot of work on, like they talk about zoo stud books. So it's one of those, it's a small population of animals, but they're like, okay, we've got a female here, and you guys have a male here. We have the space, we have the time, we have the resources. We're going to bring them together and try to breed them to be able to keep some of these populations. Because you can have extinct, completely gone. You can have extinct in the wild, which means they live in zoo populations, but they're no longer in their natural habitats. And so some animal species, they're trying to keep it that, they're being bred in captivity, they're being studied in captivity. Denver Zoo, again, if you've seen the eye exhibit, so you go through the primate house and you go to the dark room and you stand there and you kind of like wait for your eyes to adjust to see the eyes. Those are critically endangered primates from Madagascar, but they do well in captivity here in the States. Population numbers are declining in Madagascar, but we have a couple centers here in zoos that work together. I'm not really answering your question of where they get the animals from, but it's one of those, they can keep populations going in zoos as necessary, but then some animals they don't breed. Like a majority of animals they don't want to breed. I know everybody loves oh, there's a baby X and everybody freaks out and goes to the zoo and it's good for business.
Right.
But, okay, baby X has a lifespan of 80 years and requires how much money a day or a year or 10 years. So there are all these things that they really have to start to consider. And that was as scattershot an answer as I could possibly come for you.
I did know about how they track DNA in between, and really, there's a nexus between zoos, and that makes sense to me. But I didn't think about the other side of that, like not breeding. But I just asked because they kind of hang out there, and you can really see them almost in real time, right? Because they're just.
And some of those, and one thing that's important about those is a lot of times, often, those animals cannot be returned to the wild. Maybe they have a disease. Maybe they have, like in birds, because we work with a lot of birds, they're injured, so they can't be returned to the wild. Or they were taken as infants or very young animals and were never properly trained. Taking animals and releasing them back to the wild can be an incredibly complicated process. Like if an animal is taken, like captured from the forest and everything else, and they manage to find that animal very quickly, then sometimes they can bring them back to the forest and re-release them. Like that's an ideal situation. More often than not, they have to take the animals, heal them, get them back up to proper weight, and then start a very slow process of introducing them to the forest, and then kind of recapturing them, reintroducing, recapturing, and then, okay, you release the animals, but are you releasing it in a space that's safe? Does it have the resources necessary? Does it even know how to get the resources necessary? So again, it's another one of those conundrums where you can do nothing or spin off the rails and try to find a solution.
Which happens even with eagles, you know, even in our country.
Yep.
Or anything that gets hurt, and they often become part of an educational experience for us.
They become they become a species ambassador,
Yeah.
and it's powerful. It's really neat to see some of these animals up close and everything else, because for the most part, you never have those opportunities.
This is true, so true.
How did you, was there like how are you inspired to lead this adventure, or, is there any like defining?
I'm not good at anything else.
No.
No, it's a.
but like what directed you?
It's a fair question. So, when I started, because I did my master's and my PhD here at CU Boulder, and when I first came in, I lived in China for a year, and I was an Asian Studies minor. That I think I forgot to fill out the paperwork, so I never actually got that degree on my transcript. Oh well. I figure I've made up for it now. But it's my first year of grad school. Bert brought over two Vietnamese colleagues, so Dr. Quint and then Ha, who was pictured in one of the other things. So Bert was working with students in Vietnam, and he decided the best way to move forward with conservation is to help train some of these young scientists. So he brought them over to the States. You know, they went through their programs here, and I got to hang out with them. So it was kind of like, Bert was super busy, and I was busy, but not as busy as him. So he's like, hey, here are two Vietnamese colleagues, hang out with them. And so we spent 2 or 3 months together. I think it was 2 months here in the States before my first trip to Vietnam. My first trip to Vietnam, I get there, and I already had friends and family kind of thing. You know, oh, get in the back of the motorbike, I want to show you these places, and we're going to check this out, and let's go to the zoo, or let's go over to the forest here. And while I've always had an interest in it, I never had an outlet for it. And suddenly it was one of those, okay, here's how you can do it, and you know, here, take a look at the research that's been done and find something that's interesting to you. So I studied feeding. For some reason, it just is, it's neat to be like, okay, here's a whole bunch of food choices, and we can eat anything. Why did you choose that? No, really, why did you choose that? But looking at that within animal populations, and so it just kind of caught my interest, and I like doing it. I like sharing it with people, and I really love giving the opportunity to take students to Vietnam now, and kind of walking through the streets of the city or walking through the forest, and they just have a ton of questions. Like some students, you know, we went to a temple, and she's like, what's going on with this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and I'm like, listen, I will give you the 20 seconds I have on Buddhism, but beyond that, we can look it up together. So it keeps me on my toes. It keeps it interesting.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Oh, yeah.
How much, or did you guys get any like pushback from like the government when you guys were like writing the action plan, or like was that easy? Or how did that go about?
Nothing's ever easy, but because we had government officials in the room and we had the laws in the room with us, it was give and take. You know, we can always say, you guys shouldn't be hunting, you shouldn't be in these areas, these forests should be protected. And they say, well, historically, people have had access to these areas, and we should actually be looking at projects in order to develop livelihood for local communities to be able to access some of these products and use them in a sustainable manner, rather than putting up a fence, having somebody with a gun saying, stay out, which is a conservation fortress model that does not work in Vietnam. You say you can't go there, they're like, can't I? Same here too, but you shoot for ideals, and you try to make certain that everybody has a voice at the table. rather than coming in and saying, no, that's wrong, that's stupid. And there's been plenty of that historically, and it continues to this day. And I'm not gonna single anybody out loud for the videotape to hear forever. But it's definitely one of those, there are some people that say, I know better than you, and the general response to that is, get out. So, not very useful. Whereas if we kind of go in and say, hey, these are things we'd really like to work with, here's the reasons why, here's the work that has been done, here's the work that you guys are already doing, let's see what we can do to continue to expand on that. And some days it's easy, and other days it's one of those, I'm gonna just go cry for a while. That's all I can do. No, good question.
On that point, I like to, when we're doing Asian studies things on campus, I like to say, you know, we're working with the scientists so that they don't just parachute in and do science to people, but do science with them, right? Like that there is an important distinction there that sometimes Americans think that they're gonna go kind of solve somebody else's problems for them, but they don't take advantage of the local knowledge and the local expertise and culture and sort of ways of living that impact the science that they want to do in those places. So my question is, you know, you read National Geographic or whatever, and it's this climate anxiety is real, right? Like, and how would you sort of approach raising these conservation issues with their students in a way that empowers the students to feel like they can make a difference, rather than just, you know, my instinct is to crawl under the covers and never come back out because it just feels like too much, you know?
Yeah. Going into classrooms and working with students and trying to get them, even if it's just taking them to the forests. We've had the opportunity to take Vietnamese and international students to a lot of these national parks and to a lot of the forests and get them engaged in it. Like, if nothing else, it's the craziest thing to take students out on the road at night and tell them, okay, everybody, turn off your lights, stop moving, and just listen. And lots of jitters, but eventually they kind of settle down, settle into it and everything else. And then there's a spark. People are like, oh, what's going on? You know, you guys hear that? How does this work? And so I think that it captures their interest and their imagination, and that is one of those, they come back with questions and you try to guide them in the right direction or offer them connections with people that are actually doing the work to kind of give them an outlet for it. Or, you know, they do, Greenville, I'll use an example, an NGO in Da Nang. They go out and they talk to all the schools in the surrounding area. They do forest cleanup days. They take them to their education center. They talk about everything that happens just within their small little local area and how that's connected to a larger area around them. Again, not a direct answer to it, but it's one of those, trying to get people involved, trying to show that it is the simplest thing to recycle something rather than throw it in the trash, or to have a better understanding of some of the animals in your area, or being able to share what they know about some of these things. And all of those we've found to be very positive and kind of moving the needle in that direction. But yeah, there's plenty of other times where it's one of those, what are we doing here? Can't just give up on that though. At least not yet. Thank you.
I'm a science teacher, and I was fascinated by the pictures, not just in the article, but more clearly on your screen. But just the geology of those islands, and just looking at like where they were mining the limestone from. Like, for me, when we talk about it through like the age of the earth and like evolution of earth, and then obviously of species. So I just think that, and then in addition, just the thinking about the mangroves, because those are obviously beautiful and they live here too, right? So I think that, and our Rocky Mountains are right there, like making those connections with my students is insanely cool, because I think I can help bridge, like, we are so closely related to every other continent on this earth, like, really, when you think about what similarities we have between each other. So I just wanted to say that I think it piggybacks on what she was saying, and what caught my attention and how I might make that be more apparent to the kids instead of like just looking through a textbook, like trying to really help students see that more realistically, more in real time.
I think for social studies, like I hit pretty hard on your dollar has consequences. The way you spend your money impacts other places. Your clothes are not made in the United States, even if the tag says made in the US, it's not made in the US. And so having students understand like your actions when you go and you buy stuff off of Shein or whatever, or you go to Forever 21, right, and you buy these really disposable clothing items, or you go and you travel somewhere, are you going places that are mindful of the community there, or are you being a tourist and more destructive? I think our kids are able to understand that and be a little bit more self-aware than they otherwise would be.
That's a fantastic point, and one of the things that I mentioned very briefly, but Vietnam has an incredibly expanding middle class, and what, even in 2005 when I started going there kind of thing, the changes between 2005 and now, it's night and day. It's also one of those, most of the population, 70+% of the population is under the age of 30, so they have no recollection of the war. Like they've been living through an expanding and economically growing time. We make jokes about it where it's one of those, I see more Rolls-Royce Silver Clouds and Maseratis and fancy cars and everything else in Vietnam than I do here. And it's most of the places I hang out. I mean, Long Mont doesn't exactly have a plethora of supercars, but huh?
Just go try.
Just go. But there's so much more thought into where things come from and what the money goes towards. And the problem is that there's a lot of good ecotourism, but then there's also plenty of things that label themselves ecotourism that are not. And so it takes just looking a little bit further, just looking a little bit underneath the covers to see what's going on there. But yeah, it's incredibly interesting to see. And I've been back to, I lived in China in 2001 to 2002, and I would love to go back there and see all the changes that have happened, because I imagine I wouldn't recognize any of them anymore. So much of the changes so rapidly.
Any more questions?
Well, then thank you guys again so much for letting me come spend some time with you this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you all, welcome. You've already been here for a little while and are enjoying our space. So I'm going to put up the agenda of what we're going to do for the next hour or so. We're going to, so all of this should be in the lens of our resources are available to you all as teachers. We do a lot of teaching to the college students. For example, this semester we've taught 22 different instruction sessions that cover all kinds of topics and all kinds of classes. So we have English classes, writing classes, history classes, geography classes, women's studies classes, art, education, so very multidisciplinary. And we like to go out into the community and teach to K through 12. We obviously don't have the time to do it as much as we would like. And we're going to show you some of the things we have done for K through 12 if you want to start thinking about how you would bring maps into your classroom or bring our resources into your classroom. But whatever we show you today, keep in mind that this is a public library. This is a public university. You can come and use our stuff. You can send your students. We can come up with ways for you to check out some of our maps and take them to your classroom. We can even do field trips. So keep that all in mind when we're talking. So we're going to tell you a little bit about our resources, show you quickly how to use the library's catalog, tell you about how we've gone into K through 12 classrooms or had K through 12 here, but sometimes we have field trips here. And then we're going to do a map elements exercise and kind of discuss how we frame what a map is and how a map is different maybe than another kind of text or medium that you might teach with. And then we're going to learn about Southeast Asia specifically with these stations that we put out for you. So the first thing we like to do when we have college students in here is we ask, how many of you even knew CU Boulder had a map library? A library dedicated to just maps, right? And most of the time, the students don't know that either, unless they've been in here for something else. So as many students as we get in here, we like to say, hey, now this is your place, now you can come use maps. So tell your middle school and high school students that as well. So we think we have about 200,000 maps in this collection. And as you guys have moved around today already, you've seen all the cases. They're all filled with maps. Most of our collection is an open collection. You can open a drawer and flip through it and look at maps. So about 200,000 maps, about 3,000 atlases in the shelves here behind you. And then that first shelf is map referencey books, so also atlases and gazetteers and things like that. And then, I don't know if you've wandered back at lunch or anything, but the rest of the stacks have to do with earth sciences collections. So books about earthquakes, volcanoes, dinosaurs, right, paleontology, because you're in the earth sciences library. And you're in the earth sciences building. So this is what our subject specific library is all about. So we have a lot of maps. Our maps cover a whole lot of topics. So we like to talk to the students about how maybe you only think your map is your phone, right? But before that, maps existed and people used them for hiking. People use them in their cars. And you'll see here that we have way more than just that. We have a lot of thematic maps, right? Maps that cover different themes. So Southeast Asia, it's a really good way to see the different themes we have. We have some, basic geographic maps or maps that are just about a certain region or maps that are just about water, so a certain topic. So yeah, we try and collect a little of a lot of different themes. We collect a lot of different time periods as well. So if something's really new and current and it's made in print form and it's relevant and something we would like, we would buy it. So if there was a print map made in 2024, we would purchase that. And then we have maps that go back, so primary source-wise, we have maps that go back to like the mid-1800s. Oh no, now 18th century, because we have some Africa ones from the 1770s. So the actual piece of paper is from 17.
Oh, we have some new Asian gifts
Oh, we do, right.
from the 18th century that someone recently gave us for their Chinese published maps.
Yes. So we have a few of those, and then for Colorado, if you're social studies teachers, we have a lot of things from like the 1850s, 1860s forward. So maps of the West and maps of Colorado when it was still a territory. So different time periods, different kinds of maps, and then different areas of the world. So a lot of, not actually this semester, not so much, but in past semesters, a lot of what we teach would be Boulder and Colorado in the West, because that's where we are and that's kind of our strength, if you said we had a strength of our collection, and that's probably the most maps we have. But this semester especially, we've done a lot of work with some classes in the center here. So we've taught a class that was specifically all of Asia. It was called Asia 2000. And then we've taught two classes specific to Southeast Asia. So what we're really learning is we're kind of getting to go in our drawers and get more familiar with the other areas of the world that we have. And we do try and have a little of everything. It's a large research university, so we try and collect for what people are interested in or what researchers or faculty are studying, with the understanding that maybe certain countries in South America we don't have as good coverage as we would of Colorado, for example. Maybe certain countries in Asia we don't have as good. And then we learn, oh my gosh, there's a lot of interest in Vietnam. Maybe we need to buy more maps of that. So that's kind of how we operate here. Does anyone have questions so far? Great. Okay. So Naomi's going to show you really quickly our library's catalog to show you how you can find when you're off in your classrooms and you're like, oh, I really would like a map of this. Maybe I can check it out from CU Boulder. How to find that sort of easily in our catalog.
Right. I just wanted to point out the part about the depository program.
Oh, yes,
so
we did do that.
in case you're interested, this library system, this branch plus Norrell in the main library, is part of the federal depository system, and we're the regional depository for the Mountain West, I suppose you'd say, which means that any government publication from the federal government and then also Colorado state governments are supposed to be deposited in our library system here. So if you have any interest when you're teaching in the government publications that are very historical, a lot of them, but are continuing to this day, this is a place where you can get help with that. So for instance, when National History Day, teachers bring their kids that is a big focus, is the government documents. So I just want to point out that we're the people who are going to keep these in perpetuity, and since you're taxpayers, everyone should have access to them. It's like our job to make them available.
Okay, so I'm gonna go to the libraries.
Yeah, so we have a public catalog that you're welcome to use from anywhere when you log in. We actually have 2 catalogs. They just both kind of relaunched last summer, and there's still sort of glitches happening with them, but they have a lot of materials. And maybe for your purposes, if you don't want to come here and look for something to check out physically, there are all kinds of digital materials in here too, which might be worth looking for. So we have links to a lot of digital objects that reside in other places and other databases, maybe in someone else's collection, that you can also find through your same searches in our catalog. So we'll start here. Let me know if you can't hear me. I'm just going to try to be loud all the way to the back. So this is our homepage, colorado.edu/libraries. You can just Google CU Libraries. This page will come up. This homepage gives you links to all the different things we can help you with. If you need to talk with someone, there's contact us too. I mean, you can reach out directly to me and Eileen, but if you have some other subject matter and you want to find a different librarian, that's fine too. This one search bar is our main gigantic catalog. It works kind of like Google. You can put in a keyword search, and then from there you'll pull up a zillion results, and from there you want to sort of limit them or facet them. So if you want to go ahead and put in Southeast Asia map, see what happens. This catalog, come over here so I can. This one search gives you access to everything in our library system that we have here physically and in offsite storage in Denver. We have massive amounts of storage in Denver because we can't fit everything on campus anymore. But it also gives you access to databases that we subscribe to, although for your purposes, you may not be able to get into all of them because some of them are only for people who are affiliated with CU. But you can get access through here, links to maybe digital objects. If it turns out you see something you want, but you don't have keyword access, you don't have login access, because you're a member of the public, you can ask me and Eileen and we'll try to get you the article or whatever it is you're not getting access to. We're happy to get you a copy. So Eileen did a search for Southeast Asian map, and what are the number of results?
Oh, there we go, 10,000.
10,000, that's like a lot. But what this means is it just means there's the keyword Southeast Asian map in the record somewhere. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a map. So what we want to show you is you can do filters up here. There's all kinds of filters. If you want things within a certain date range, you can search by date. The source type down here is what the terminology is in this catalog for format. So if you go down to maps, to get actual only maps that are Southeast Asia, there's only 123. So you have a much more granular search that way. And then once you get these results, it will tell you where the location is. We have call numbers in this collection, just like book call numbers. If you're here, you can get it yourself, but it will also, if it's a digital image of some kind, it will tell you that too, and it'll give you a link. Okay, so that's the main catalog.
I was just seeing if there's a digital one.
Yeah, there's an online one.
Yeah.
So it's a CIA one online.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it will give you the link, let's
It
see.
should give you a link. We shouldn't say much until we actually try it.
Access options, there you go.
Yeah, access
So you can.
connect to online resource.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so hopefully these things, I mean, that would be a public, that's a government publication.
Yeah.
It should be available to you, unlike maybe a journal article. I don't know if we need to show the other catalog because that's just for things that are here on campus.
Yeah.
But if you're here and you want things that are physical that you want to check out or get in your hands, the other catalog, which we can show, just show you the link to on the homepage,
Okay.
is really it's really for things that are here. This other catalog we just went to is like all the things we subscribe to, which are tons and tons of different databases. So this other little catalog right here is this library catalog is just for if you're here on campus and want to get something to take with you. Okay. Does anyone have questions about that? No, it probably works like the ones you have at school, like with EBSCO, you know, a lot of the same kind of stuff you have in your school databases, except probably a lot more for researchers. So, okay.
So I'm going to show them our webpage and
Okay.
just how to get to a few resources about Southeast Asia. Okay, so this is the Earth Sciences and Math Library specifically, our little branch here. And then we have the map collection. What I do want to show you, that we show all the students as well, are these research guides. So we tried to divide maps and geology by some very general themes here, right? And what I like to show people is this historical maps tab. It's hard to see, but these are actually tabs. They kind of just look like squares to me, not tabs. So print would describe, in general, the kinds of things we have in print in the library, like Naomi was talking about. Digital, what we've done here is, as librarians, we've kind of put together our favorite, or we've vetted some sites that have really good digital maps, so that your student isn't just Googling Southeast Asia map, and then they get the Google images, and some of them are great, but some of them are like Etsy, or Reddit, or Pinterest images, right? And then they're gonna plop them in a paper, and you know, they don't know where they got them from. So especially in college, that's really important, right? You wanna have, I mean, and we're gonna talk about this a little later, how you teach the students what a reliable map is, what a reliable source is, versus anything that you find on the web, right? So these first four are local to Colorado, and they're things that we've actually created here in the map library, collections that we've created and digitized. And we're not gonna talk about those because we're talking about Southeast Asia. But these are kind of our other favorite digital map collections mostly across the US, but a lot of them have really good international map coverage, both current and historical. So one we like to point out is David Rumsey. So David Rumsey's collection is housed at Stanford, and I think he was a private collector originally, and then he deposited his collection at Stanford. And it's just insane the amount of stuff he has in here. So we've done this search before, right? So what did we get? How many? 765 scanned maps. So we'll just open this one. What's really cool about his collection and the kind of the interface that this is on is you can zoom in at this like insanely, and it will resolve in a minute, at this insanely massive level of detail. And sometimes you can even see like the grain of the paper. They've scanned it at such a high level. And then what's also very cool is you can export for free. This you don't have to be on campus. You can literally just Google davidrumsey.com and get this anywhere. So this is free and open to the public. But you can see you can export at a huge level of detail. So yeah, we just wanted to point out kind of if there's a way to narrow down everything that's on the web map-wise, maybe going through one of these other databases is the way to do it, because at least you know they're vetted, they're reputable map library sites, right?
Yeah, and they also have good metadata. So if you know your students need to learn about citations and bibliographic information, you know that the metadata here is accurate and what they can use.
Okay, that's I think all I'm going to do with that. So here. Okay, so I wanted Naomi to talk a little bit about the exhibit that we have up today, because we're going to now talk about ways we've brought K through 12 into the library and how we might bring it in the future. So I wanted you to tell them just about the exhibit and the exhibit program, the future.
Oh
exhibits.
yeah. So as a curator, I have for years created exhibits. Probably you notice coming down the stairs, there's a bunch of art. There's some more on the entry, and this exhibit actually, when you're done, if you want to walk around, it goes all the way to the back and around the back corner and through there. This is a exhibit that includes art by a local artist named Charlotte Basson, who lives in Golden, and hers are the really big world map pieces that you see on the walls that are done in all different kinds of media. And then the other artist is Deborah Cole. She's in Santa Fe, and she does the small pieces that are in the cases, and she created these art pieces on actual map pieces and kind of reworks them to make like new worlds out of them. They're both really wonderful artists, and then interspersed with it are things from our collection that are by women cartographers, which was an interesting search because it turns out we didn't have very many things by women cartographers because historically there weren't very many. So for example, this has been used in about four class assignments so far that it's been up. It's about to come down, and we'll do another exhibit in the fall. But we try to make sure that our collection is represented on the walls here. You were talking about, someone was talking about having the walls be another teacher, and I was interested in what you're saying, because we do get a lot of students who look at what is up, and we try to rotate on a regular basis things from our collection with different subject matter into these exhibits, and then try to tie them into curriculum in some class or another here on campus. And this one has been particularly interesting for women and gender studies, for the cartography classes, or one of the art history classes who wanted to look at this exhibit and have their students do some analysis. So I mean, it's something that could be used for maybe older students. There's always an exhibit and always things to look at here and learn from that involve maps and cartography in some way or another. Is that what you were
Yeah,
thinking?
100%.
Is the link to when you change the exhibit, is there like some information on the web?
Yeah, there's always a news story about it, or if you went back to our homepage that we started off with and you go to news and events, there should be stories about what exhibits are in the library system in general, because there's some usually in Norland in the main library also.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately we have not been able to, we don't have enough digitizing staff here in our library system to make these into digital exhibits also, so that you could see them in the classroom. Like we'd have to somehow digitize all the art pieces, and we just can never get to that. But yes, so you can see our rotation of events and exhibits on our webpage.
Cool.
Absolutely. Okay.
So one other thing we wanted to just remind you, so as we looked, as teachers, it doesn't look like there's like a tier of borrower that's teacher, but there is, if you're a Colorado resident, you can get a library card here for $45 a year. Another way around that is you can ILL things from your local library. We will ILL to your local library, and we will ILL maps. And another way around that, for maps at least, maybe not for the rest of the collection, is just talk to me and Naomi, and we will figure out a way to lend you stuff. There is an agreement, I believe, that Colorado high school students can get a free library card here, so they don't have to pay. So if you go on our main page and you look at library services, it will give students instructions how they can get their free library card. So that was kind of nice for us to learn. We were sad about the teacher thing, but they should do that.
It's too bad that you have to pay for a library card here, even like we said earlier, that it's a public institution with public collection.
But you can also, I mean, without the library card, you can come here anytime and use the stuff.
Right.
Take pictures. We're gonna informally let you take stuff like no one else would, but we so, okay, so now we wanted to show you, to give you some ideas about how we've used the map library, how K through 12 has come into the map library, or we have gone out to the community. So one of our fairly regular visitors is Platt Middle School, probably since at least a couple years before COVID, and then they did come after COVID as well. So this is a Boulder Valley Middle School, and the social studies classes will come in here specifically when they're doing geography units. So if they're learning about scale and projection and things like that, we will put out stations specific to the things they're learning. And most recently we had when they were doing civilizations. So we tried to have out maps based on their, and it wasn't specifically based on like the civilizations that they were studying, but things about civilizations, like transportation. So maybe there'd be a whole station about how people get around, right? And how can you read a map and decide how people got around at the time of the map? Maybe there's something about, like we have one here where we're going to do about land and landforms. You know, when you're looking at an ancient civilization, were the mountains a barrier, and you know, did that divide civilizations, or how did people trade across when there were barriers like that? So that was a really fun one. We made some stations for them, and then we always have our fun maps that make you think station, and we try and put out like weird things that you wouldn't necessarily think were even a map. Like sometimes we have like, one of the ones in the exhibit is like the map of the human heart, not of the heart, but like how you think about love. And just like getting kids to think about what is a map and what isn't a map. So that station was really fun. And then this one in the picture, I didn't have any kids in it, unfortunately, but we do this Guess the Map theme station where we cover up all the text so they don't know this is one about population. And we cover that up and then see if they can use the clues on the map. So you cover up the key to guess what it is. And it's harder than you think. Sometimes, and we have multiple choice, and sometimes we'll put funny ones, but sometimes we'll put two that could, like, maybe legitimately that could be the map. They do a pretty good job with it. But that's always a favorite. They love doing that, the middle schoolers. So that's fun, and you can think about how you might use that. You saw the giant map of Colorado upstairs. So this tends to work best with elementary school students, but I promise you all age students love the giant map of Colorado. We've got into a lot of elementary schools with this, and the activities we do can vary. You know, if they're just learning about cities or towns, it's as simple as you can see here, like, okay, what's the capital of Colorado? Everyone in a blue shirt go stand on the capital of Colorado, something like that. Naomi and I kind of created this one when they're learning about landforms and the different, you know, there's mountains, there's plains on the eastern, mountains, and then on the western portion there's all these weird things like buttes and canyons and spires. And so we kind of created this one where they go to a certain area on the map and they have to physically create the land feature with their body. And it gets super crazy and they're like, oh, ah! yelling and screaming, but they love it. And then we always do Simon Says on the map. The other thing that is very cool about this is there's a whole organization called COGA, which is Colorado Alliance, Colorado Geographical Alliance, and they have a website, and they've actually created, they have lesson plans on there, more than just what Naomi and I have tried, for different age groups. I think they created them in conjunction with National Geographic, who made the map, but it tells you like the resources you need, how long the lesson will take, what age groups it's best for, things like that. So that's a really good place to go. And I'll give these slides to Hannah, and can you email them to her? Sure. Great, okay. Because we've tried one or two, we've tried one with, from there with, when they were doing like populations of Colorado, so like what were the major population centers in the 1800s versus 1900s versus current, and seeing how the people in Colorado moved and the kids physically moved with that. Yeah, so that's one that's on there, but we have not tried nearly all of them that are on there.
Does this exist from, are there giant maps
Yes.
of other things not to Colorado?
Correct, yeah. So I think if you were to Google National Geographic giant maps, there are others. There might be one of the world. We were gonna look and see if there's one of Asia now that we're doing all the Asia stuff.
There's definitely one for each state.
Yep.
And then there's probably one for the US.
Yep.
I don't know, like, I don't think they have every country for.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
When I bought this, and this was a good like,
Yeah, that would be nice.
yeah. When I bought this is probably what, 8 years ago we bought it at least.
It's been out for a while.
It was
yeah.
probably $800 or $900. So
Oh.
it's so also on that website I should say is a map that shows you who owns giant maps of Colorado all across Colorado that you can borrow from.
Oh,
So
wow.
certain school districts own them. We will lend ours out, but we will only lend ours out if we go with it. So it doesn't get destroyed. And we're fine going with it. And if you like want to do all the teaching and we're totally silent, we're completely fine with that. Or we can come and teach. It doesn't matter. But there may be other districts that will just let you, like if your district has one, they might just let you take it, you know.
I think we're supposed to get an extra copy that had been in Anschutz, or some strange like place we were surprised that they had a copy.
Yeah.
And we're gonna get it from a geographer, some geography faculty member.
And then we can lend
And
that
then
one
we can
without
maybe
us.
lend that one,
Yeah.
but we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
We were just told there's an extra
True.
one floating around somewhere, so.
True. But I think like Adams 12 or something.
Yeah, we have one.
Yeah, I thought I saw them on the list for sure. Okay, so Naomi, you're going to talk about some of these other activities we've done.
Yeah, so this little hand here is pressing some buttons on a light-up exhibit. This was one of these very, very fancy giant, you know, tripart board
Yeah.
exhibits for a National History Day project. And the maps that were used, this is just one example, are from our historical map collection. So this was like a project that was based on local events in Denver. There was a pretty horrible event, probably everyone knows about this now, but at the time they did this a number of years ago, it was like a violent massacre against the Chinese that was in downtown Denver, and you can actually see all the addresses and buildings on this particular set of historical maps that we have in this collection. So the students actually used the maps to locate the different events, and then if you press the buttons, it would light up where on their board the events were taking place. Anyway, this was a really, really good project. It went to nationals. We were pretty pleased to see that happen. But we have had a lot of use of our historical map collection by History Day students with their projects. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's all I want to say about that.
Yeah, that's fine. And just, we actually had a student teacher who was teaching about coal mines in Erie, Colorado, and she came, it just happened that we had like this really, I don't have it out right now, but this really huge, massive map of one of the under, like, all the under tunnels and streets under the ground in the mine, and she was able to bring that to the classroom and be like, this is right under your town, you know? So that was really fun to work with her too.
I mean, it's just a way of saying that really if you want the primary source historical
Yes.
documents that tell the story of our state, we have a lot of really good maps here. And
Yep.
outside of that, our historical map collection gets like more sparse as you leave this area.
As you move this area, right. And maybe we should, you know, expand it for Asia now that we're getting all
If we can try. I mean, we did, like I
Right.
said, we got a really interesting gift recently. It's just Chinese and Japanese maps, but maybe this collector will add some more
Right.
primary source materials.
Right.
When he's someone who's at a retirement age who's dispersing his collection, and we keep thinking, what are we gonna get?
All right, so now we're gonna shift and we're gonna show you an activity that we do with the college students to refresh them on what is a map. And then Naomi's gonna talk to you a little bit about how maps tell a story and how they are not necessarily neutral. And we were gonna get some feedback from you all about how you might impart that to students. That just because a map looks like it's scientific and neutral doesn't necessarily mean it is.
And then after that, everyone's gonna
Then you can get up and work, and you'll get to work with all the selfie sticks stuff.
Right. So this is something we do with students regularly, and it's kind of funny because once they're in college, they're a little further away from this, and so I always say, well, just put back your elementary school brain back in and remember what you did when you were doing your basic geography
Right.
lessons in school. So this is what we say, maps have what? And we ask them before they start doing whatever their classes, whatever their analytical questions are for their topic, we ask them to just remember what maps are versus other types of information formats or other types of cultural productions, because they talk a lot about the other forms. They learn to do their research with things like journals and books. You know, the art history students come in here, they're used to analyzing images, for example. So we just want to talk about what makes a map a map. So you tell me, what do maps have that other formats don't necessarily have? Like, what are their features?
Labels.
Labels, good. Labels are very important. And then we ask the class, like, what do the labels help you understand?
Meaning.
Meaning, okay, good. I'm sure it'll be interesting to see if you all like do this a lot faster. Okay, what else? Teachers.
Hopefully a key.
Hopefully a key,
Absolutely.
yes, a key or a legend, however you want to say it. And what does that do for you to understand what you're looking
That
at?
helps you interpret the labels
Interpret.
in the symbols on the map.
Interpret. Yep. Interpret, and then symbols. So symbols are important. We often ask them, why do you need symbols? And then what are the advantages and disadvantages of symbols?
So an advantage of a symbol is that it takes much less space,
That's right.
as opposed to, you know, a label might be really.
Yeah, good.
And then you can as well homogenize the information, like, oh, the triangles, everywhere you see a triangle on the map is a mountain.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
good.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good opportunity also to remind your students about abstraction, that a map cannot show you every single thing on the physical earth. And so when you do an abstraction, what is it you choose to put there and what is it you cannot put there? How much do you leave out? Right, and that's kind of the disadvantage of abstraction. Okay, what else?
A title would be nice.
A title is great, yeah. It doesn't have to have one, but it certainly helps encapsulate the meaning. And that's where we're gonna go next, is it like directs your thinking about what it, you anticipate seeing, and that can also be advantageous or not. So what else?
Color, whether it's like black and white or multiple.
Colors, yeah. And what do the colors do if you have multiple colors? Like, what are they used for?
Distinguish differences.
Differences, like data differences,
With boundaries.
boundaries. Boundaries, sorry, my handwriting is not a teacher handwriting. Data, so like often there's colors that are associated with elevation or with population, other kinds of data. Blocks, okay, what else?
Color can also help with like symbols, like rivers would be blue.
Yeah, okay, so colors for landmarks or land features can be, yeah, and sometimes you expect to see those in very particular colors because you just said rivers are blue. Okay, what else?
Quadrants or,
Like the grid system?
like a grid system?
Yeah, exactly. And what is the grid system is necessary for?
Knowing how to get to that location.
So it's like a wayfinder, yeah, or a location grid. We also like to talk about how you're used to latitude, longitude. That's pretty much what we all think of, but some maps we have that are historical have like a different type of grid system. There's like property grid systems that are different, called like township, for example. Just to remind people that if you look at a grid system, you need to also make sure you understand which one it is and what the markers mean. Okay, what else? Compass, yeah.
That's everyone's favorite. I think they learned that in first grade.
Everybody loves compass roses, yeah, right. You might have noticed on our button tray, we have all different types of compass roses because everyone likes how pretty they all can be. Yeah, so that's directional. It's like the man who was here earlier, is it Brian?
No, John.
Jonathan, gosh, sorry.
His last name was O'Brien.
Oh, that's why, okay. Anyway, so Jonathan O'Brien, when he was here earlier, he was talking about a map that confused him a lot because the convention was not to have north at the top, and it took him a while to understand. But yeah, for the most part, we're used to understanding north is the top of the map. Okay, what else?
Well, like size and distortion.
Distortion, yeah. So this is really good because this is the one thing, and I'll tell you this, the college students almost never remember to talk about projection and to talk about how you take the globe and you project it flat and why that distortion is really important for what the map is going to make you think that you're looking at. So yeah, we do end up usually having to bring that one up ourselves, so thank you. Yeah, we're a step ahead. So distortion and projection. That's actually something in this exhibit that I just talked about. If you haven't gone to the far back corner, it's kind of worth a look because the artist in this exhibit had only been using one Mercator-like projection her entire career for 20 years to make these maps, and when she started learning there was other types of projections, she got pretty excited, so she wanted to see like what would happen if she tried another one and what difference did it make to the way the world looked. Okay, is that?
There's one more thing.
Can we say it?
Yes,
Scale.
scale.
Oh, I
forgot.
Yep.
Scale, yep, so students often get that one. Yeah, the scale is really important too. Sometimes you'll see a scale on the map, scale bar, sometimes you won't, but it's the same concept as we talked about with abstraction and symbols, is that the scale gives the map maker an opportunity to add either a lot of detail or not a lot of detail, and there's a lot of choices that have to be made. So what we want you to remember is that all of these things that cartographers use to make a map are important for how the story of the map ends up being told. For the argument the map might be making to you is all formed by the choices of what to include or what not to include with these elements. So this is just like the way we show you, we try to review the things that you all are teaching them in elementary and middle school, because by the time they get to college, they've sort of put that away for a while.
Great.
And we want you to remember this when you're looking at the maps today too.
Okay, so let's go to the next. Okay, so did we get all of them? It looks like we did.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, I think the thing that's interesting is our program has developed here a lot with instruction because faculty members in certain departments, especially things like language, English literature, oh, sorry, the camera, English literature departments or other literature, these Southeast Asia departments, and then the program for writing and rhetoric, they come here because they want their students to think about the idea of critical analysis of a different type of format, and to remember that every piece of information you're getting, even when it's like a supposedly very scientific thing, which most people think maps are, or if it's like a research product that a university would make and it's also something that's been you know, like heavily vetted for its truthfulness, like still tells a story and still has a rhetorical purpose. And so that's what we want you to remember, and we also try to help the students remember that because of things were made in different time periods, had different contexts, that we want them to look at the maps and remember this time period had very specific aesthetic styles, it had very specific arguments, people thought differently, and so you have to like take all of that critical thinking to a map even when you might not think you need to, the same way you would naturally do for like an article you read, or especially like a newspaper article, for example, or an image you see online. So that's what we want to remind everybody.
So do we want to get up now and look at those and talk about
yeah.
that? Yeah.
I can just tell you,
Okay.
we were gonna, what is it we wanted them to do?
Well, we kind of wanted to hear, so we put out in the alcove, these are not Southeast Asia, and maybe we could take like 5 minutes to look at them. Maps that more obviously tell a specific story or have a slant than looking at this,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And then we were curious, because we don't know, because we teach to college students, how you might impart that to younger students.
Right. So what these are is a selection of mostly historical maps, like some of our really most interesting pieces. So if you want to get up and have a look at them, they definitely are, some of them made for the purpose of advertising.
Right.
I wanted to also mention that after Jonathan O'Brien spoke earlier about resource extraction and tourism and the reasons that things happen to our environment, I started thinking that a lot of these address the same concepts. There's one over here about water projects, reservoir and dam projects in our country. There's things about grabbing land out of reservations, for example, with homesteading. So all of the arguments that he was making about a developing country are shown in these historical maps, just in a different area. So I just wanted to point that out. So these are ones that we take out for other classes so that you get a sense of what they're looking at. So you're welcome to just come in and
Yeah, just take a few minutes to look at those, and then we'll go on.
And
to
some of them we
Southeast
collect
Asia.
deliberately, like this is a new piece. Oh, and I should mention they often have a back, so feel free to take them down or flip them up, like then you can see the rest of the advertising. It's pretty neat stuff.
So we were just going to summarize that little exercise to show you some of the questions we ask the college students when they're trying to think critically about maps and what the story is that the maps tell. And it's very, methodical and very obvious. Who is the map? Who made the map?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who do you think it was made for? Was this made for an audience? A lot of historical maps at the time, if you had a very old atlas, like there were only certain people that could read. So it wasn't made for the general public. It was made for
The rich people.
Exactly.
It really was.
Right, exactly. So who was the audience? What did the symbols represent? And then this is a big one that we can do with a lot of different classes depending on what they're studying. Whose voice is visible and whose voice is invisible on the map. So if you show a map of resources or a map of extraction, it may not show any population on the map. It may not show you any of the forests on the map. It just might show you where the resources are. Well, and that obviously has a specific spin, right? Because it's telling you extract. So that's a really interesting one, and the college students have a lot of good things to say about that. And then, of course, evidence. Why are you saying all these things, right? What evidence on the map makes you draw those conclusions?
I think depending on the time period, it could tell you what was known about the world around them.
That's
Like I'm
right.
thinking of the I think it's Catalan map.
Yes.
And that map is so interesting, but it tells you a lot about what
People thought.
people
at
thought
the
about
time.
others around the world.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, and if they didn't know anything, they sure filled it with interesting imaginary speculations
Right,
about other
right.
peoples and animals.
And actually, that's really interesting too. The college students love looking at the ways that maps were filled when we didn't know. Sometimes they would just write unexplored in this big like empty swath of map, right? Or sometimes they'd draw mythical creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of those people with big eye right here and 7 legs or
Right.
That's the kind of,
Yeah.
like on Catalan.
Right. Okay, so that's all we have for the slides. Let me shut that off. So what we put out for you all, and we were going to have you get in pairs, but there's only 5 of you, so I don't even know if you need to do that, is we put out 4 stations that have to do with Southeast Asia. And you guys can think about how you might adapt something similar for whatever age you teach. So we did this with actually both the Asia and the Southeast Asia class that we taught for colleges. We put from about the early 20th century to current day maps that show Southeast Asia over time. You can do this older, you can go into other centuries, of course. And then we have some pointed questions that we make them answer. So we have handouts for you, and you all can go around and answer the questions. So, questions might be things like you said compare and contrast is really important. How is the map from the 1920s different from the one from 2020, right? are the borders different? Did country names change? You know, things like that. So really looking at that. Another exercise that we did with the college students was they were actually reading novels about different modern day topics that took place in Southeast Asian countries. So The Sympathizer was one. I don't know if you've heard about that one. He's nodding. I'm trying to think. Pachinko was one of the books. So really well-known novels that are about issues in Southeast Asia or stories in Southeast Asia, and then the teacher had them answer pointed questions about the novels. And what looking at the maps did is it kind of placed them geographically in the story. So if someone's describing, like, we moved from, I think the Pachinko story was we moved from Korea to Japan, and how did we do that as a family? The kids could actually look at a map of Southeast Asia and say, oh, they said they took a boat from here to here, right? So we had, the professor had targeted questions about the geography of the area that the books were taking place. So we did that with your two books, the Pangolin and Barani, and you can kind of look at these handouts and decide how you might do that for your students. And we are also happy to lend out maps if you wanted to do that. So this other station was land and landforms of Southeast Asia. And again, it's just, there's some pointed questions too. It's just thinking about how certain land features are important, whether it's important to the economy, whether you settle by a river because you're going to get resources that you wouldn't get elsewhere. If there's mountains, how does that impede things? How does that separate out species, right? How does it separate out peoples? Things like that. So really having that visual for your students to see, like you could talk about the Himalayas all you want, but to see on a map like this, what's green, what's mountainous, right? To see how big the river is, maybe is visually more obvious to them than just talking about it. So that's what this station is about, and then we did an animals one, because everybody loves animals. So Naomi, if you want to come, we can show them. This one, instead of doing questions, we had another little type of exercise that we do with the college students, so we were going to demonstrate that for you.
Yeah, this is an exercise that, that the Art Museum, who also does a lot of teaching here, SSEWA Art Museum, teaches with their collections on campus, got from the museum world. It's just called Close Looking. Maybe you've already done this or heard it, but you take a couple people and all you're doing is really like reflecting back to each other, back and forth, what you're seeing and how you draw your conclusions. So, for example, this is a map. This is such a beautiful map that is probably everyone's favorite when they come here, based on a mural from the exposition in San Francisco in the 1930s. So what I would say to Eileen is, what's going on in this map? And then you say what you think the narrative might be.
There are animals swimming and flying over the Pacific Ocean.
All right. Well, and then the next question is what makes you say that? But
well, I say that because I see a lot of birds, and birds fly, and I see a lot of aquatic life, and they swim.
And what more do you find?
I also see animals on the land, and I see representations of rivers, so maybe those are animals that live near rivers.
Good. And then you just keep going around, right?
Yeah.
What else do you see going on in this map?
I don't know, that's a lot of stuff.
Well,
I see a line that goes across the map that looks like fire.
Right.
What makes you say that? Well, I see it.
Right.
What
I
is it?
think
Yeah.
that it's also intended, maybe you're being a little literal. I
You're
don't know.
being too literal, yeah.
It's intended to get people talking about what they think is happening,
Yeah.
like if there's a narrative
Right.
that they're seeing.
Right.
Right, so that's what we wanted to have you all just do with these because they're so visual. You don't have to record the observations, but you can go back and forth and tell each other, you know, why is there the fire here? Well, it's showing the equator, probably because it's hot. Well, what makes you say that? Well, it has little flames, that kind of thing.
Right.
So, anyhow, it's just a way of looking at imagery where you can keep the conversation going even when you think it's stopped, because you can just rotate back into
Or you
looking
can go
at
to the other person too, right? So, and that's something they use in the art museum a lot.
And we end up having to do, the college students are a lot quieter than K through 12 students.
Yep.
I mean, really,
Really.
especially the younger ones, they'll just be like, and then we have to try to find a way to keep the conversation
Yeah.
going, right?
Yeah. it's really interesting because when we do have K through 12 kids in here, they won't stop talking. They want to
They're
tell
fun.
you everything they see on the map. Yeah,
They're a lot
which is
more
great.
energetic,
It's
right?
we're like, that was so exciting.
Right.
But so since we're pretty informal here, maybe just spend the next 10-15 minutes looking at the different stations. Everyone can take a handout. You don't actually have to do it, but to give you some ideas of how you might do things in your classroom. And then please ask us, we can tell you more about the map specifically, like if there's a story behind the map or the time period of the map. Yeah. Let us know if you have questions.